January 23, 1942. Liverpool, England. The docks are alive with the rhythmic sounds of cranes, the creak of ships, and the soft clattering of crates being loaded and unloaded. But beneath the buzz of activity, the air hums with an unspoken tension. For all their apparent movement, everything seems to be stuck in a holding pattern. The war effort is escalating, supplies are crucial, and the Allies are losing ground in the Atlantic. What the men working the docks don't know, what they can't possibly understand, is that their very lifeline is about to be severed. The Germans are playing a silent game. U-boats, prowling beneath the surface of the icy Atlantic, have begun sinking merchant ships with eerie precision. The British Navy knows the threat exists, but is largely invisible, the enemy a shadow beneath the water. There is no clear face to this danger, no immediate threat they can target with guns or torpedoes. The enemy doesn't march on land, doesn't raid their cities with bombs. It simply waits, quietly beneath the waves, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And so, the Allies, trapped in the fog of an invisible war, are running out of answers. The simple, brutal fact is that the enemy has learned to wait longer, strike harder, and disappear just as quickly as they came. It's a war of attrition. The supply lines are being torn apart, one ship at a time, each loss weakening the Allies' resolve, their strength, their capacity to continue. The Germans are winning, and yet, nobody seems to have a clear plan for how to stop them. It is here, in this murky period of indecision and creeping desperation, that we meet the first person who dares to see the problem for what it is. His name is Lieutenant Commander Lionel Crabb, a man who should never have been in this position. He isn't a naval officer of great renown, nor does he come from a prestigious military family. Crabb is a diver, a man who found himself serving in the Royal Navy by a twist of fate more than by design. He isn't a strategist, a commander, or even a man who stands out in a crowd. But Crabb is about to become the first person to truly understand what needs to be done. And what he uncovers is more than just a strategic blunder. It is a terrifying gap in the system, one that could spell the difference between victory and defeat. Crabb's first inkling of the problem comes in the form of a quiet observation, a subtle shift in the patterns of warfare. He watches as the Allies continue to send their merchant ships into the Atlantic, trusting in their patrols and their radar to keep them safe. And yet, the ships continue to sink faster than the Navy can replace them. He studies the reports, watches the patterns of the attacks, and begins to realize something that no one else has noticed. It's not the convoys themselves that are the real target. It's the supply lines that feed them, the pipelines that keep them alive. And these lines are vulnerable in a way no one has considered before. It is this realization that sets Crabb on a path of quiet rebellion. While the High Command and their advisors sit in their ivory towers, coming up with increasingly complex strategies to outsmart the enemy's submarines, Crabb realizes that the solution is not in grand, sweeping changes to the existing tactics. It's in something simpler, something more dangerous. He doesn't need to create an entirely new system of warfare. He simply needs to target what's already vulnerable, to exploit a weakness that no one has yet acknowledged. But the more he speaks of it, the more he is met with skepticism. His peers dismiss him, laugh at his ideas. To them, Crabb is a diver, a man of the deep who should stay in his lane. They don't see him as a strategist or a visionary. They see him as a diver with nothing more to offer than his mechanical skills. And so, despite the clarity of his insight, Crabb's warnings fall on deaf ears. The military bureaucracy, blind to the reality of the threat, continues its slow march forward, losing precious resources to the very threat Crabb is desperately trying to warn them about. But Crabb doesn't stop. He can't. He knows that the answer to this crisis lies in a place that most people refuse to acknowledge. The solution, he believes, lies under the water, beneath the very ships that are so vital to the war effort. And so, he begins to work in secret, to study the U-boats, to learn their patterns, their habits, and most importantly, their weaknesses. It is in these quiet moments, away from the eyes of his superiors, that Crabb begins to see a solution taking shape, one that would be dismissed as impossible by anyone who wasn't willing to look beneath the surface. The answer is not in tracking down the U-boats with radar or increasing the number of ships in the convoy. The answer lies in finding a way to disrupt the U-boats before they can even strike. Crabbe begins to experiment with new ways of infiltrating enemy lines, ways that no one has ever considered. He realizes that the answer to the crisis lies not in the air or on the surface of the ocean, but in the depths below, where the human form can become as invisible as the enemy itself. And so, with no formal support, no recognition, and no resources to speak of, Crabbe begins his work. His goal is simple: find a way to break the supply lines of the enemy, to cripple their ability to resupply and reinforce their submarines. He knows that doing so will not win the war on its own, but will buy the Allies the time they need, the critical time to regroup, rebuild, and eventually turn the tide. It is, in his mind, the one way to strike back against an enemy that is too powerful, too elusive, and too insidious to face head-on. But Crabbe's work is not easy. Each experiment brings him closer to a solution, but also exposes the terrifying limits of his resources. With nothing more than a small team of divers and a handful of experimental tools, he begins to test his theories. The first few missions are failures. The risks are high. Crabbe nearly loses his life on more than one occasion, but with each failure, his resolve only grows stronger. He knows that the stakes are high, that this isn't just a matter of pride or recognition, but of survival. And yet, even as he inches closer to his goal, the bureaucracy that governs the military machine remains indifferent. No one is watching. No one cares. It's the same old cycle of institutional blindness, the same old cycle of missed opportunities and ignored insights. But Crabbe is undeterred. He knows that what he is doing is not about accolades or fame. It's about something far more important. He is working to save lives, lives that no one else even knows are in danger. In the shadows of the war effort, Crabbe continues his work, building towards a solution that will forever change the way the Allies approach the threat in the Atlantic. But even as his success becomes inevitable, he knows that the real battle lies ahead. The moment of truth is coming, and he wonders, just for a moment, if anyone will recognize what he has done, if anyone will even remember his name when the war is finally over. February 11th, 1942, somewhere off the coast of Ireland. The cold Atlantic water lapped gently against the hull of the ship, its steady rhythm masking the tension that gripped the small team of divers aboard. Lieutenant Commander Lionel Crabbe stood at the edge of the deck, his breath visible in the frosty air, but his mind was far from the surface. Beneath him, in the dark, silent depths, lay the enemy, unseen but ever present. The mission was simple in theory: infiltrate enemy lines, sabotage their supplies, and retreat undetected. But the reality of it was far more daunting. Crabbe had become obsessed with the idea of disrupting the German U-boats from below, an enemy that could destroy convoys without warning, without leaving a trace. The Allies had long struggled against the U-boat menace, relying on crude depth charges, radar, and sonar. But Crabbe had seen the flaw in the system. The U-boats could dive deep, and once they were submerged, they became ghosts. The solution wasn't to try to find them from above, but to become one of them, to enter their territory and strike before they could strike back. A silent war, fought beneath the waves. The training had been grueling. Crabbe was no stranger to the underwater world, but this mission would push him beyond any limits he had ever encountered. His diving equipment was experimental, crude compared to the systems used by modern-day forces. But it was all they had. The diving suit, a bulky, ungainly creation, weighed 100 pounds, its metal helmet sealed with thick glass to protect against the crushing pressure of the deep. Every movement in it felt like swimming through molasses, the suit resisting every effort to maneuver, every inch of forward progress. The mission wasn't just about stealth, though. It was about survival. Crabbe and his team were tasked with reaching the hulls of enemy ships and planting explosives, enough to cripple their ability to resupply the U-boats. But even more perilous than the potential failure of the mission was the danger of detection. One slip-up, one moment of hesitation, and they would be caught. And when the Germans caught you in their waters, the consequences were swift and brutal. The team was small, but each man had his role. They weren't seasoned warriors, the type of soldiers who thrived on the battlefield. These were men who thrived on ingenuity and risk. Their greatest strength lay not in numbers, but in the willingness to push the boundaries of what was possible. Each man, like Crabbe, had been overlooked by the higher-ups, dismissed as unimportant in the grand machinery of war. But now, they were the ones who would make the difference. The ones who would challenge the impossible and disrupt the war from the very depths of the ocean. Crabbe glanced at his team, their faces hidden behind the dark visors of their helmets. His gaze shifted to the horizon, where the sea met the sky in an indistinct blur. They were going alone, with no backup, no reinforcements. If anything went wrong, they would be on their own, stranded miles from shore. But Crabbe's mind was already set. He wasn't going to fail. The ship slowly drifted to a stop, and Crabbe knew it was time. The cold, dark water beneath them was waiting, a vast, infinite expanse of nothingness. He could almost feel the U-boats lurking, their silent periscopes scanning the depths, their engines barely a whisper in the water. The fear didn't come from the prospect of battle. It came from the realization that the enemy was everywhere and nowhere at once. It was an enemy that couldn't be fought by conventional means, a shadow that would not be caught by radar. The only way to win was to take the fight into their world, and Crabbe was about to do just that. The divers, Crabbe included, slipped into the water, the cold instantly overwhelming as it seeped through their suits. Their heavy diving boots and equipment made each movement feel labored, as though they were wading through molasses. But they kept going, each stroke a calculated risk, each movement taking them deeper into the heart of enemy territory. The water swallowed them whole, and soon there was no sound but the muffled rush of air through their masks and the beat of their own hearts. Crabbe's mind raced. His hands gripped the ropes leading to the underwater mines, the tools that would allow them to cripple the enemy's supply lines. He had to be swift, decisive, and precise. The plan was clear: reach the German merchant vessels, plant the charges, and retreat before anyone realized what had happened. They would disrupt the supply routes, slow down the enemy's progress, and hopefully turn the tide of the war in favor of the Allies. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. The weight of the mission, the isolation, the chilling cold, it all added to the pressure Crabbe felt. But the pressure didn't break him. Instead, it focused him. He was no longer just a diver. He was a ghost in the depths, a silent force that could strike and vanish without leaving a trace. His team followed him, moving with quiet determination, knowing that each second brought them closer to the target and closer to the enemy's deadly reach. The water grew darker as they descended, the surface world slowly fading away. The deeper they went, the more dangerous it became. But the deeper they went, the closer they got to the heart of the enemy's power. Crabbe's breathing became more controlled, the hissing of his regulator cutting through the quiet like a distant echo. He could hear nothing now except the rush of water and the beat of his own pulse. The mission was simple, but the stakes were monumental. It wasn't long before the outline of the enemy ships began to emerge from the gloom of the sea. The silhouettes of the merchant vessels seemed to loom over them, vast and imposing, their hulls dark and silent in the abyss. Crabbe motioned to his team, signaling them to prepare for the next phase of the mission. There was no turning back now. They swam towards the nearest ship, their movements slow and deliberate. Crabbe's heart pounded as they neared the hull. The enemy was just a few feet away, and yet there was no sign of them. No lookout, no patrols, nothing. It was almost as if they had vanished. But Crabbe knew better. The enemy was there, watching from the shadows, waiting for the slightest mistake. He could feel their presence, lurking just out of reach. And yet, despite the danger, he couldn't help but feel a sense of exhilaration. He had made it this far, and now, with his hands trembling from the cold, he was going to do what no one else had been able to do. The first charge was set. Crabbe's gloved hands worked with practiced precision, securing the explosive to the ship's hull. He felt the metal of the ship's side, cold and unforgiving beneath his fingers. He had no idea whether this would work, no idea whether the Germans would even notice the damage, let alone care. But there was no time to second-guess. The charge was in place, and it was time to move. As Krabs signaled for his team to retreat, a sinking feeling washed over him. The sea, which had seemed so infinite and indifferent, now felt hostile. The distance between him and safety had never felt so long. But he was not alone. The mission was still alive, the hope for success still burning bright. And then, just as they were about to swim back into the darkness, the unmistakable sound of something large shifting in the water sent a chill through Krabs' spine. His heart skipped a beat as he turned, his instincts screaming at him. He glanced at his team, the same thought shared between them. They were not alone. The enemy had come. In that instant, the shadowy underwater world, once an ally, had become a perilous trap. The U-boats were closing in, and the ghostly silence was about to shatter. Would they make it out in time? Would Krabs' daring mission be in vain? The question lingered in the cold, dark depths. May 20th, 1943. London, England. The war was entering its darkest phase, and the Allies, though still fighting, were beginning to lose hope. The toll had been immense. Ships were still disappearing beneath the waves, convoys were being shredded, and the German U-boats were relentless. But somewhere in the labyrinth of military bureaucracy, far removed from the front lines, there was another battle taking place, one of recognition, one of truth, and one of erasure. Lionel Krabs' name had become a whisper, a name spoken in passing but never acknowledged. The people who needed to know about his feats, about his daring sabotage missions, about his pivotal role in the war's turning point, remained blind to his achievements. It was the kind of injustice that could crush a man. But Krab, like so many others, didn't have the luxury of frustration. He had a job to do, and he had done it well. But the recognition he deserved seemed just out of reach, buried beneath layers of military protocol and institutional indifference. The deeper Krab dove into his missions, the more he realized the profound irony of his situation. He had disrupted German supply lines in ways that were unimaginable to most, a silent assassin lurking beneath the waves, and yet, when the dust settled, no one knew his name. No medals, no accolades, no acknowledgement from higher command. Krabs' success had been inconvenient to the powers that be. The methods he employed were unconventional, unorthodox, and dangerously outside the military establishment's comfort zone. The operation he had masterminded was not one of grand battles or sweeping victories that could be paraded before the public eye. It was a quiet war, fought under the surface, with no fanfare or glory. He had done his duty, risking his lifetime and again to strike at the heart of the enemy's logistical network. But the British command, shackled by tradition and bureaucracy, refused to embrace the change Krab had sparked. They preferred the tried-and-true methods, radar, sonar, and convoy systems. Krab had been right all along, but there was no place for his kind of victory in the official records. For the men who had never seen the dangers beneath the waves, Krab's work was inconsequential. They couldn't see the depth of his contribution because it wasn't visible from their lofty positions in the command center. It wasn't enough to stop the enemy from sinking ships. It wasn't enough to shift the balance of the war. In their eyes, Krab had been a small player in a grand, complicated game, someone whose achievements didn't match the scale of the conflict. His accomplishments, though brilliant, seemed too niche, too specific to be appreciated by the wider war effort.